EU4 is a great game, a lot of options for exciting gameplay, ranging from European military powers like Poland or Prussia, to colonial titans like England and Spain. Further afield you can experience fun Horde gameplay, Indian wealth and the like, or even that peak Australia gameplay that I know you all guys love. However, if you've played a decent chunk of EU4, you will know the feeling of finding a cool country you want to experience, or a fun-sounding achievement you want to play, selecting the nation, loading into the nation, and then being met with the abject reality that actually you can't be bothered to go set up your estates right now. Frankly, you can't be bothered to so much as play the game, full stop. Well, no worries. For this curse, I'm here with a solution. And before we get into EU4, we do have to get the usual things out of the way. A like on the video would be appreciated if you haven't already, and a subscription would be amazing. Count Cristo, an individual I've watched extensively, especially his Housewind 4 NC game, as well as EU4 Mayo and Taxes campaigns, sits on 17.4k subs. So let's aim high and let's aim big. Let's see if we can overtake his sub count. With that self-shilling out of the way though, let's get into the game. See, playing EU4 and doing your thing can be fun, but when you just can't be bothered to actually play a country, a fun thing to do, I find, is go ahead and make a custom nation. Give it some pretty overpowered or underpowered ideas in whatever section of the world you want, and then tab into Observer using the console command Observe, or Spectator also works. The premise is to see how well the custom nations that you created will do when unleashed into the world. Now, it won't have any missions, so it'll be relying solely on the government and national deals that you give it access to, but there's some really powerful stuff you can give it access to, and it can be quite fun, or sometimes infuriating, seeing how well the AI does, or how badly the AI does, with the nation buffs you give it. Now, if you're doing this at home, one thing I would recommend, or for any other AI observation game really, is to go into options, and by the way, the custom setup is where you change your custom nations or enable them if you don't have them enabled, but you want to go to general and you want to change the difficulty from normal to very hard. On top of giving every single AI this pretty neat selection of buffs, which includes things like core creation cost to help it core faster, and idea cost to make it fill out its ideas faster, it's also going to, more importantly, increase the AI aggressiveness. This is going to lead to the AI consolidating a lot more, and doing a lot more interesting things. Because what AI aggressiveness does is it means that the AI needs less of a margin of error to declare wars. And this means that it will declare wars it's less likely to win, meaning that you're going to see more wars, but you're also going to see more dynamic wars. And I think that's a much more fun thing to observe. Another thing that's also important to mention here is the interest per annum is reduced for the AI by 1, meaning that it pays 3% interest on its loans instead of 4%, and that's excluding any other buffs the AI may end up getting. This makes its loans insanely cheap, meaning that if it does go into excessive debt fighting, it's not exactly crippled. And this is pretty good for the AI because it tends to struggle with the economy, but we'll mention overcoming AI issues with the economy in a bit. So once you have this set to very hard and you've accepted it to apply your settings, what are some fun things to set up? Well, it depends on the sections of the world you're in. A classic is, well, if you're setting up anywhere in the New World, is to set up a custom nation with Western technology group with whatever ideas you want in North or South America or even sometimes in the Caribbean. The premise being that if you give them some colonists, you'll see an early colonial nation there that kind of just blobs. It's an absolute classic to do a Vinland, some kind of Vikings that, in your lore headcanon, arrived over on the coast, and you give them some fun colonial ideas and see how well they perform, not only against the Native Americans, but also when the Europeans arrive. Bear in mind, if you're going to give them Western Tech Group, they're going to have maps of the West, but also because they're Western, they're going to spread those maps to other West technology groups, so they're going to see the New World earlier as well. A Vinland custom nation in this setup is a very classic one, and I'd recommend giving them Siberian Frontiers if you want them to really overperform. But if you don't want them to do too well and just a more normal campaign, a couple colonists and their opening ideas will do well. Another thing that I think I'm going to mention right away is whenever you are setting up your custom nations, I would suggest quite strongly that you would invest a couple points into giving them more starting provinces. As a player, you could probably use those extra points that you give them into, well, stronger ideas. However, with AIs, I find they really struggle as OPMs, so giving them 4 or 5 starting provinces goes a long way to help their expansion. And by expanding earlier and expanding faster, they just have more money and more manpower and more resources to do things than they would if they get an extra 2.5% discipline or something you could do out of those extra points. So if you are setting up any kind of custom nations, especially if you want them to be able to afford colonization, I would suggest giving them at least 5 to 4 starting provinces at the bare minimum, if not more, if you're setting them up in this area. And also remember, if you are going to give them Siberian Frontiers, making them start in, for example, the Caribbean is going to be quite a bad idea because they can only colonize on the island. they would never be able to Siberian frontier outside onto like Florida or onto America, for example. They'd only be able to Siberian frontier on their starting island. But if they have a land connection, for example, if you give them Siberian frontiers and you start them in Newfoundland, this connection over here is going to allow them to Siberian frontier, although it's going to be hindered quite a bit initially since they're going to take, well, a bit of time to actually Siberian frontiers through all of this land right at the start. However, outside of colonial nations that are, well, basically glorified colonial nations with fancy ideas, another classic version of this is setting up a Wakanda wannabe in Africa, giving them some really powerful military buffs and some really powerful starting technologies, basically starting them on Miltech 3 while everyone else is on Miltech 2, and letting them loose into Africa. The setup and specifics of that is unique and up to you, but bear in mind that Africa is a relatively rich area with some pretty decent trade goods. So someone with Western tech group who starts not behind on tech is going to perform quite well in this area already, and it can be quite a fun campaign to see how well they perform against the Europeans that will inevitably arrive and start fighting them. So that is also a classic choice. For me though, I find that custom nations that you shove into the middle of India basically play around the same as custom nations you shove into the middle of Germany. There's nothing too major to say there, just kind of whatever area thematically you prefer. If you had a couple campaigns with this that you've already done in Germany and you want to try it in India instead, you're going to see similar things, but it's worth giving a shot if you want it as well. Ming kind of dominates the China area, which is fair, so when you are making a custom nation in this area or around the hordes, you kind of want to be playing around either the collapse of Ming or some kind of proto-Ming or whatever kind of form you want to be doing around that, so it can be quite fun. And I'm also going to take a quick tangent before we get into Europe to mention setting up a colonial nation in Australia or basically on the islands here. It's another Wakanda type of Western colonial nation that can build up a nation, try and resist Europeans, but this is just a very unique area for it to format. In essence, you start on an awful trade node on not the greatest trade goods on the planet. Australia isn't exactly known for its wealth. However, up north of it, the Moluccas and Malacca are incredibly wealthy and incredibly good land for your custom nation to, well, expand into. So it can be quite an interesting campaign as well, and hence one I would suggest as just something to try out, just to shove a custom nation in there. The nice thing is that the Native Americans, well, Native Australians, even though they're coded as Native Americans, are going to offer pretty much no resistance for you. So it's a relatively safe-ish area to experiment with a weaker custom nation, for example. That can still be quite fun. However, most custom nation games are kind of set up in Europe. If you want your custom nation to be inside the Holy Roman Empire, make sure when you're looking at this Imperial map mode that its capital is on any of these Imperial provinces. That means that even if you set up your capital in, for example, Cambres, even though Burgundy normally does not start in the HRE because its capital would be in the HRE, it would count as a member of the HRE. And HRE membership is very, very good for AI, since they're able to actually expand into Germany and won't be too scared. There are some exceptions to this, of course. If you do start as a subject, which you shouldn't be able to do when you are setting up as a custom nation, you rely on basically your overlord's permission to join the Holy Roman Empire. This is why Holland and Brabant, for example, are not members of the HRE. Otherwise, a Germany custom nation is a classic option, but you can go for other things as well. Something in the Balkans is an option. Romania is also a relatively interesting area because you start with some interesting early expansion and then you're surrounded by quite big boys like the Hungarians and the Poles and the Ottomans that are going to put your custom nations through the gauntlet. So there's a lot of interesting areas for you to shove your custom nations into, that's for sure. Now though, let me throw one together and let me talk about things that you should consider giving your custom nation and interesting things to give your custom nations more specifically. So here we go, I've set up a custom nation with its capital in the Austrian gold mine. Feel free to give it any map color you want, that's one of the funner things of this, as well as making your fancy emblem. The creator on here is pretty cool, so have fun with it. And I'm following my own rule and giving it a bunch of starting land, although it's already setting back 89 points, so do be careful with that. National adjective, for those unaware, is what determines if, for example, as this custom nation, I own the lowlands. When I zoom out on the map, it's going to use that national adjective to describe the owner of the Low Countries. In this case, it will be the Tyrolean Low Countries, because our national adjective is Tyrolean. You can actually have quite a bit of fun with this. A classic version is making your national adjective amazing, because then you'll see things like amazing France, amazing Low Countries, amazing England, or things like that. Really, the world is your oyster. But I digress. Have fun with your starting rulers, just bear in mind that if you do give your starting ruler a lot of buffs, there's nothing stopping the AI rolling him as a general. If anything, they probably will go ahead and roll him as a general, so be prepared for your amazing ruler to die disproportionately quickly, especially to what a player would have. But let's get to the government tab now. Your culture is pretty important for both determining, well, how friendly the people are around you and what nations it can form. So if you don't want your country forming something stupid, make sure you can give it a culture that doesn't really form anything. So for example, if you give it the Ugric culture group, it's not going to have any friends, but it's unlikely to form anything that these guys have access to, probably because the rally culture group has no real formables, if I were to wager a guess. The AI is never going to change its primary culture group, so that's going to be relatively fine. With that said, the religion probably matters quite a bit more, and that can be done for some pretty neat buffs. After all, Zoroastrian is a very balanced religion, especially if you're playing around in the Persia area, but there's also some cool other religions you can give. Bear in mind, though, that if you are playing in Germany and you're playing as anyone that isn't a Catholic, you're going to be tanking Imperial Authority quite a bit by the fact that you are going to be a heretic prince of the empire. Finally, tech group is relatively self-explanatory, whatever tech group you want it to have, and the governments is where you have your fun. There's a lot of really cool governments for it to give, and there's nothing stopping you becoming a theocracy here, or a republic, or whatever you really want. Just have fun with this one. There's a lot of cool things here, like the Sisterhood of the Joan of Arc, which gives you some 5% discipline just in your government, as well as a monarch mill skill. Or even the fun Aztec government, although be careful, just because it's here doesn't mean it's not broken. Finally, let's talk ideas, and here we're going to talk about what is really strong for AI specifically, and honestly what is just really strong in general. Admin efficiency is such a strong modifier that even though the AI doesn't really stack it, it's just a good thing to give it because it's going to be able to actually abuse it. Although be careful, it can be quite expensive. All power cost also functions the same way. It helps the AI overcome stupidity by just making any one of its actions better. Cannot build buildings or go force limit or declare war and those kind of things can be quite good for getting points back if you really need to squeeze out points, but I would certainly not recommend things like cannot declare war, as that's going to really stifle your colonial nation and be quite boring. Cannot send missionaries is a classic if you wanted to pursue a humanist route, but doesn't give you that many points back. And cannot build buildings is actually pretty crippling if you don't realize, even though the AI doesn't tend to build good buildings, it still tends to build buildings, and this can be quite harsh. I would strongly suggest giving it a lot more governing capacity as well. We can give up to 40% here, which is frankly really strong. And ignore calling distance can be quite fun to give it as well, although be prepared for some really bad border gore. Things I would recommend avoiding though are things going to be like length of election term -1. This is really strong for a player, as this allows you to basically get yearly elections, and hence 50 monarch points a year. However, the AI is probably not going to be doing it. If anything, it's not going to get it, even if you make it a republic, it's probably not going to take the reforms that make it decrease this election term. Another thing I won't suggest taking is minimum autonomy in territories. The AI is not going to be able to use this effectively, like, at all. So this is one of the things that is going to be really strong for a player, but really not strong for the AI. If you are playing on very hard though, you can give it quite a bit of AE impact, but bear in mind it just starts with -25% for existing, so having an extra 20% from its ideas means that it's basically taking half AE already, and that can lead to some really incredible blobbing. But of course, bear in mind that doesn't help the AI actually deal with the stability of its own country. Giving 25% province war score cost though is really helpful for both player and AI, because they're going to be able to take a lot more land and hair scale quite quicker, especially if you're stacking it with another -25% war score cost versus other religions. Meaning that if you give both outright day one, you'll be able to decrease province war score cost against other religions by 50%. This is also really insane if you give them a really obscure religion, like Jewish. In terms of military buffs, I would strongly suggest classics such as morale of armies or discipline. However, if you want to straight up see wind buttons, infantry fire, infantry shock pips are obscenely strong to give out. And as much as I would love to meme about the AI doing this anyway, this is also insanely stupidly strong. It's just not as strong in the AI's hand, because even though they can ignore zone of control, from my experience, the AI doesn't really realize they can do this and just doesn't. Movement speed is also just quite a fun one to give out because they just go everywhere. You go zoom, zoom, it's fun. With that said though, another thing that I just have to mention, but I will also warn you because it's just practically a win button, especially for an AI that struggles economically, and that is going to be flat goods produced. This thing is completely busted. You can get +2 goods produced, and the way this works is, well, +2 goods produced means that every single province just generates a flat +2 goods produced, or an effective 10 production. Now, this is absolutely insane on gold as well, because normally 10 production income on gold would mean that you will have a pretty decent chance of depleting that gold already. But that +2 goods produced is independent of the production already there, so you don't actually gain any depletion chance from it. You still do gain the inflation, so do be cautious about that, but you don't have to worry about depletion, which is really, really good in my opinion. And in general, just on every other province, you're getting 10 free production dev or 10 free dev everywhere. The other thing that's also really insane about this dev is not only is it 10 free dev everywhere, it's 10 free dev that doesn't increase your future dev cost. Not that the AI devs excessively, but still it really helps. This is an insane economic modifier and basically fixes the AI incompetence financially and then some. It is of course insanely strong for players as well, so it's one of the few modifiers that are, if ever banned, it's usually this one that is banned within customization games. But yeah, it's incredibly overpowered and should definitely be considered if you want to see an AI succeed. I'm just a bit cautious about mentioning it because I would actually suggest really you don't give it because it's a bit too strong to give to an AI. But it's there. And yes, you can absolutely stack it with 20% goods produced. Now, one of the things you may encounter as you're constructing your custom nation is going to be the point limitation. And I think this is where part of the fun of the game can begin. The point limitation can allow you to basically set a challenge for yourself of, okay, how good of a custom nation can I make for the AI to use and conquer the world with, or whatever they want to be doing, with a limit of 800 points. And then when you're relatively happy with your success, you can make it harder for yourself by going down to 600, 400, and then finally 200 points. Or even as low as 50. That can be quite challenging, and so be prepared to make some significant sacrifices, but that is a pretty decent way of approaching this challenge. However, another thing that I have to mention is 800 points can sometimes be limiting, especially if you're giving someone Siberian Frontiers in the New World, that's going to use up basically all of your points. So, one way of overcoming this is basically modding the game to remove the point cap. But if you are modding the game already, I would suggest, well, actually making your own nation. It's not that bad, especially if you're already modding countries that exist and given them modifiers that already exist. What I mean is you're not adding any brand new culture groups and you're not adding any brand new government reforms or anything of that nature. You're just basically creating a nation with government reforms that already exist in the base game. And when you're doing it that way, there's no point limitations. It's whatever number you want to give it in the code. This also means that if you want to give a nation something stupid like 100% discipline, you absolutely can. And I think that's just worth mentioning. But, of course, that tends to devolve into modding, and if your approach to the game is you can't be lazy, then something tells me you probably can't be bothered to pull up a coding editor either as well. Just something worth mentioning if you want to go that route. With that said, one thing that you will find with this setup is that eventually you're going to get really good at making custom nations that are very good at dominating the area. So another thing that I would suggest that can be quite fun as well is getting together with a couple of your friends. Getting your friends to submit a bunch of custom nations that they make together, and putting them all in the same world. They will usually kill the AI around them quite quickly, but once they've done that, they're going to have to turn around and start fighting each other. And this is where the fun begins, because you're going to have to make a custom nation that's not only good at killing the AI, scaling and blobbing, but a custom nation that's also good at killing other custom nations. And that can be certainly a very fun experience. It also means that if you're absolutely all for playing MP, but you want to have the actual experience of MP, this is a pretty interesting way of achieving that. You don't have to worry about messing up reinforcements or being bad at scaling, because the AI kind of does that for you. Granted badly, but, you know, it does it for you. And it's a very chill way of doing it, because you're basically just watching the AI go at it. With that said, though, that is all I have time for today. Thank you very much for watching, with a special thank you to Ark and Solar. Goodbye.